Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My parents taught me to work hard, be responsible, and respect others. These values led me to a job at the big blue and yellow electronics retailer where I worked in the mobile phone department. The employee discount was nice, and I usually enjoyed helping customers find the right technology. But then there was Black Friday. Black Friday turns reasonable people into shopping zombies. That Black Friday was brutal. I arrived at the store at 4 a.m. to help set up for the chaos starting at 5. By midday, I had processed more phone activations and sales than I typically did in an entire week. Our section had registers that were only for mobile phone transactions. Store managers kept telling us these registers were for mobile sales only and we should send other purchases to the front. But as the day went on and lines at the main registers got longer, that rule became hard to follow. I was tired, hungry, and running on stale break room coffee when she appeared, the customer I'll call Karen. Karen had filled an entire shopping cart with electronics, laptops, speakers, headphones, everything. At the top of her pile was a single pop socket for a phone. It was obviously a trick to use our faster mobile registers. I looked at Karen, her overflowing cart, and the line of actual phone customers behind her. I figured arguing would take more time than just ringing her up. I greeted her and offered to help. Karen said she was relieved, complaining about the lines at the front. I started scanning quickly. Everything was fine until I scanned a karaoke machine. Karen said the karaoke machine had the wrong price. I checked the screen. It showed $49.99, which was right since I had put those price tags out myself the night before. I asked if the tag had the wrong price. Karen said it should be $7.99. A $100 karaoke system for $8? That was ridiculous. I told her I was sure the sale price was correct. Karen got angry, saying she found it under a $7.99 tag and it was false advertising if we didn't give her that price. She talked louder, and other customers started watching us. I suggested another customer probably moved it to the wrong spot. Karen tried to lecture me about retail policy, saying we should keep everything in the right place or honor whatever price was shown. My patience broke after 10 hours of work. I asked if she expected us to follow every shopper around to make sure nothing got misplaced. When she tried to answer, I asked if she thought we should assign someone to follow her during her entire shopping trip on Black Friday. Karen went quiet. I told her to show me the tag where she found the machine. I asked my co-worker to watch my register, and Karen led me to the battery aisle. She pointed to an empty peg hook with a price tag. I read the label. It was for a 4-pack of rechargeable AA batteries. Karen's smug look faded. I asked if the karaoke machine looked like AA batteries. When she tried to argue, I said this wasn't false advertising and I wouldn't price match it. She looked embarrassed and defeated. She didn't argue anymore. We walked back to the register in silence, and I finished her transaction without her mentioning prices again. As she left with her cart, I saw she left the pop socket behind, the one item that gave her an excuse to use my register. My co-worker who saw everything gave me a high five under the counter. I called the next customer. The rest of my shift was busy and tiring, but that small victory gave me enough energy to finish the day. I worked at a vintage video game shop for almost 7 years now. What started as a part-time college gig turned into a full-time position after I graduated with my business degree. The owner wanted to retire and offered me a partnership deal I couldn't refuse. The shop has been my second home and I've seen every type of customer walk through those doors. But nothing prepared me for what I call the Nintendo 64 incident. It happened last month during our annual summer clearance sale. We had just acquired a pristine condition Nintendo 64 console with the original box, all cables, and even the factory plastic wrap still on the controller. This wasn't just any N64, it was the limited Pikachu edition with the raised Pikachu figure on top. For serious collectors, this was gold. I had just finished setting up the display case with this beauty when a middle-aged couple walked in. The husband's eyes lit up immediately as he spotted the N64. I could tell he was a genuine enthusiast by the way he approached the glass counter, slowly, reverently, like he was approaching a shrine. The husband asked me in an excited tone if that was indeed the Pikachu Nintendo 64 in its original box. I told him that it was, explaining that we had just received it yesterday from an estate sale. I added that the previous owner had kept it in climate-controlled storage since the 90s. His wife, who had been lingering near the door checking her phone, suddenly appeared at his side. She reminded him in a sharp tone that they weren't there for games, but were supposed to be looking for a birthday gift for his nephew. The husband wasn't listening. He was already asking me questions about the console's condition, if it had been tested, and what games might pair well with it. He talked about having one in college, but his roommate had spilled beer all over it during a party. He regretted never being able to replace it. His wife scolded him, pointing out that he wasn't a college kid anymore, but a 45-year-old man with responsibilities. She said he didn't need more junk cluttering up the house. I tried to help by mentioning that these consoles were becoming valuable collectibles, noting they had appreciated about 300% in the last decade. I probably shouldn't have said anything, but I couldn't help defending both the console and this poor guy, who was clearly reliving some cherished memories. The wife dismissed my point completely, saying she didn't care if it turned into solid gold next week. She said they weren't buying it. The husband's shoulders slumped, but he still asked about the price. When I told him it was $350, which was actually below market for one in this condition, his wife exploded. She was shocked at the price for what she called an obsolete toy and refused. The husband pulled out his wallet anyway, which sent his wife into a new level of fury. She told him to put his wallet away immediately, reminding him they had agreed to stick to their budget this month after what he had spent on golf clubs. When he tried to defend himself by saying that was 3 months ago and he had sold his old set to offset the cost, she remained unmoved. She said they weren't buying it and that the discussion was over. She grabbed him by the arm and practically dragged him toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back longingly at the display case. I gave him a sympathetic nod as they left, the wife still lecturing him about financial responsibility and acting his age. But the next day, about an hour before closing, the husband returned alone this time. He looked nervously over his shoulder as he entered like a teenager sneaking out past curfew. He asked if the Pikachu Nintendo 64 was still available. When I confirmed it was, he said he wanted to buy it and asked if I could put it in a generic bag. When I was ringing up the sale, he explained his situation. He told me that his wife controlled most of their finances. He mentioned they had separate accounts for personal spending, but she always questioned anything he bought for himself. He complained that meanwhile, she had spent $600 on a purse last week that she claimed she absolutely needed because her 3 other black purses weren't the right shade of black. He swiped his credit card and then froze, a look of panic crossing his face. He suddenly remembered that she checks the credit card statements and asked if he could pay cash instead. Luckily, he had enough cash on him. When I was carefully packing up his new console, the shop door burst open. His wife stood there, face flushed with anger, clutching several shopping bags. She said she knew he would go behind her back. How she found out, I'll never know. Maybe she tracked his phone location, or just knew his habits too well. The husband defended himself, saying it was his money from his separate account. He reminded her that they had agreed those funds were discretionary. His wife dismissed this argument, saying he wasn't wasting money on childish things because they needed a new patio set. She stormed over to the counter and tried to cancel the transaction. She told me he wasn't buying it and told me to give him his money back. When I apologized and explained that the sale was complete and already processed, she told me to void it or refund it. I told her that our policy on collectibles was no refunds or returns, and pointed out that it was clearly posted at the register. The husband, now holding his purchased console, seemed to draw strength from having it in his possession. He said he had wanted to replace this console for 20 years. He pointed out that he had covered all their bills, contributed to their savings, and that this purchase was coming from his personal account that they had agreed would be for individual purchases without consultation. His wife told him to give her the console so she could return it herself. She lunged for the bag, but he held it out of reach. He refused, saying it was his. He then brought up the 3 packages that had arrived yesterday from her favorite online boutique, asking whether those were necessities too. The wife got furious. She seemed caught between embarrassment at being called out and rage at not getting her way. She said her purchases were completely different. The husband challenged this claim, asking if her fast fashion clothes would still work in 20 years like his game console would. For a moment, I thought she might explode. Instead, she turned to me with an icy glare and threatened to call my manager. I told her that I was the manager and co-owner. The husband, now standing a little straighter, thanked me for my help and said he would be back for some games next week. He walked out with his wife trailing behind him, still protesting but noticeably less confident in her position. Through the shop window, I could see them having an intense conversation in the parking lot, but the husband never let go of his bag. A week later, he did return, still alone, and bought 4 classic games. He told me things had been tense at home for a few days, but ultimately, he made a stand about respect and equality in their relationship. He'd even set up the console in their basement rec room, and to his surprise, his wife had joined him for a round of Mario Kart the night before. I'm a little person, standing at just 3 feet 2 inches tall. I have dwarfism. This story happened about 20 years ago when I could still drive my modified van. My van had hand controls and a motorized lift that extended from the passenger side. The lift was crucial for me to get in and out of my vehicle on my own. Without it, I couldn't drive anywhere. That's why I always parked in lift van accessible spots, which are wider and have diagonal lines painted beside them. One fall evening, I went to our local mall to run some errands. It was around 5 p.m. when I arrived, and I parked in my usual accessible spot. After shopping for a few hours, I headed back to my van around 8 p.m. It was dark and getting cold. When I approached my van and pressed the remote to open the passenger side sliding door and extend the lift, I saw a tiny red sports car parked right in the striped area where my lift needed to go down. The car was so close that I could barely squeeze between the vehicles with my walker, which was only about a foot wide. This was before cell phones were common, so I couldn't easily call mall security or a friend for help. I stood there getting more frustrated, cold, and anxious as time passed. About 15-20 minutes later, I finally spotted a tall, thin man walking toward the sports car. I asked if the car belonged to him. He spun around, startled, looking for the source of the voice, until his gaze dropped down to my level. He hesitated before saying yes, the car was his. I asked whether he realized he had parked in the lift area of my accessible van in a van-only spot. His response was shocking. He said he always parked like this, claiming the extra painted width was just to let handicapped drivers be lazier and bad at parking. He added that I didn't really need the extra space since I was so tiny, and laughed at his own joke. I looked around nervously, knowing I couldn't do much if he became aggressive. I told him I needed him to move so I could use my lift to get into my van. I said it was getting cold, I needed to leave, and people were waiting for me. He dismissed my concerns, saying he was just grabbing something from his car while in the middle of dinner at a nearby restaurant. He said he wasn't done with his plans and his girlfriend was waiting for him. Then he looked at my partially extended lift and tried to force it back into my van by pushing the heavy metal platform up. I told him to stop, explaining that his actions could break the expensive equipment without the power on, and that I couldn't finish the unfolding process with his car in the way. Just then, I spotted the yellow roof lights of the mall security SUV, but the guard didn't see me. Thankfully, another man was walking our way and noticed me waving. The passerby asked if I was okay and needed help. He was tall, about 6'2", with a lumberjack build, fluffy dark beard, and a friendly smile. I quickly explained my situation while pointing to my van, the sports car, and its entitled owner. The Good Samaritan's expression hardened as he looked at the entitled driver. The Good Samaritan told me he would fix the situation. He confronted the entitled driver, giving him two options: either get in his car and move it away from my van, or start running. I couldn't help but giggle as the entitled driver immediately chose the second option and awkwardly sprinted away, probably back to the restaurant where his girlfriend was waiting. The Good Samaritan then asked if I had a way to close the lift without being in the car. I told him my remote could do that. He offered to help me into the driver's side through the regular door. I agreed, joking about him having to lift 85 pounds of little person. Normally I don't like being picked up by strangers, but he'd come to my rescue and I needed to get home. We closed the lift, unlocked the other sliding door, and he lifted me into my van, making sure I was safely in my driver's seat and buckled in. Before I left, he wrote down the entitled driver's license plate number and said the driver would regret messing with me. I later learned that my rescuer was a well-respected lawyer in our area. About 3 to 5 days after the incident, he contacted me with an update. He'd reported the illegal parking to the local police and filed a harassment complaint. I eventually went to the station to give my statement and provide photos of my van with its "Do Not Park Within 3 feet of this lift" door reflective stickers. When questioned, the entitled driver tried to deny everything and said that I was the problem. But it turned out my Good Samaritan was the assistant district attorney for our area and had the means to ensure justice was delivered. The entitled driver ended up spending 30 days in community jail due to a combination of prior traffic violations, a domestic report his girlfriend had filed a few weeks earlier, and the harassment charge from my incident, including his attempt to break the $10,000 lift on my van twice. I was satisfied with how things turned out. After finishing my criminal justice degree and struggling to find work with local police departments, I landed a job as a corrections officer. The pay was decent, the benefits were good, and I needed something stable after bouncing between retail jobs for 2 years. Working in a direct supervision jail means I'm right in there with the inmates when they're out of their cells. Depending on the day, I might be responsible for anywhere from 30 to 80 inmates at once. It's a challenging environment. I'm on the swing shift, which means I'm the fill-in person. Wherever someone's needed, that's where I go. This makes me an unfamiliar face in many of the pods, which some inmates see as an opportunity to test boundaries. After my first few months on the job, I quickly developed what my training officer called correction ears, the ability to filter out most of the garbage that inmates throw your way verbally. You have to, or you'd spend all day writing up reports for every little insult. When inmates break rules, we write institutional charges. Think of it like getting a ticket. It's documentation that a rule was broken, and it comes with results. There is a specific charge for harassing staff which we typically use when an inmate won't stop running their mouth after being warned. Last Tuesday was a long shift. I was doing count in a pod I'd been assigned to earlier that week. When I walked in, I spotted him, an inmate I'd written up a few days before for repeatedly ignoring lockdown procedures. Some inmates take these things personally, and he was one of them. When he saw me, he started in. He loudly told everyone that I was a power-tripping jerk who thought writing people up made me important. I kept my focus on my clipboard, continuing the count methodically, row by row, cell by cell. This wasn't my first rodeo. He continued his verbal assault, suggesting I thought I was better than them because of my uniform. He called me a witch and said I couldn't make it as a real police officer. A few other inmates chuckled at this, but most looked uncomfortable. Nobody wants extra attention from officers, and this guy was drawing plenty of it. I finished counting the last cell and was heading toward the exit when he delivered his finale. He loudly dared me to write him up again, claiming I didn't have the guts to do it. That got my attention. In our world, that's not just a childish taunt. It's a direct challenge to authority. It says your rules don't matter to me. In corrections, that kind of attitude spreads if not addressed. I turned and made eye contact with him. I said, "Okay." I took out my notepad and began writing down everything he'd said, word for word. His eyes widened as he realized what I was doing. He started protesting, asking if I was seriously writing him up and demanding to know what he had done wrong. He said he hadn't done anything. He kept going, digging himself deeper with every word. He accused me of being unfair and abusing my power. I kept writing, noting the time and exact quotes. The pod had gone silent, everyone watching. I asked if he had anything else to add to my report. That set him off more, and he launched into a new tirade of insults. I nodded, wrote down a few more phrases, and left the pod. At the end of my shift, I filed the report recommending a light punishment, loss of phone privileges for 1 week. In our system, that's basically a slap on the wrist. My goal wasn't to crush the guy, just to maintain order and respect. A week later, I received an email about his disciplinary hearing. I hadn't attended. I rarely do unless requested. What I read made me raise my eyebrows. The hearing officer hadn't just accepted my recommendation, they'd increased the punishment. Instead of 1 week without phone privileges, the inmate received 3 weeks with no privileges, no phone calls, no commissary orders for extra food, and no visitation. From what I gathered from the report, he'd taken his "the rules don't apply to me" attitude into the hearing room and tried it with the wrong person. The hearing officer, a retired military sergeant with 30 years of corrections experience, had decided a stronger message needed to be sent. I felt a twinge of sympathy. 3 weeks of isolation from the outside world is rough, but all he had to do was follow basic rules and show a minimal level of respect. The next time I was assigned to that pod, there was a difference. The challenging inmate gave me a wide berth, and the overall atmosphere was more respectful. In corrections, one example is all it takes to remind everyone that actions have results. That's the thing about dares in jail. They almost never work out well for the person doing the daring. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.